Hello and welcome to another Josh Plays 40k painting tutorial. In today's video I will be painting another part of our series of Hormagaunts of the Hive Fleets, and today we will be doing the Hive Fleet Behemoth, another classic scheme of the red skin with black carapace. I will be showing you a nice easy method of how to get the models onto the tabletop and looking quite striking. There'll be slight differences if you're looking at doing larger models. For instance, if you are painting like one of the larger monster styles, you may want to swap out using the red that we're going to use for the body in comparison to doing a more traditional Mephiston red. The shades are incredibly similar, and you'll find that this will sort of blend a bit better, as the contrast paints don't always sit too well on flatter surfaces if you're doing increasingly larger models. But at the sort of scale when you're getting down to the smaller models here, you'll find that it won't look out of place at all. So without further ado, let's grab some brushes and get started. So the first step on this model is to prime it after you've built, and for this I've used Wraithbone. Gives it a nice sort of warm undertone for the skin, ready to accept those sort of contrast paints over the top. And for the first one we're going to go for is to block in the sort of largest area, being the skin. And for this we're going to use Blood Angels Red. It's quite a nice striking red, not too dark in comparison to sort of Flesh Tearers Red or Bal Red. But a good starting point to work up for some highlights later on. And for this we're just going to not go too heavy, but you do want a nice sort of even coat, and just sort of carefully as you can sort of go over the skin areas. You don't have to worry about the carapace. Don't worry also if you get it into the sort of ventricles and the joints. We're going to cover those up later with a darker colour, so obviously that will it will cover the red up quite easily, but otherwise work your way around the model. Do take your time. If you do make any mistakes or you have it anywhere that you don't want it to be on your models, just sort of touch back up with sort of a little bit of Wraithbone, or whichever colour you're going for, and then move on. Once you're happy with that red skin, we're going to move on to blocking in the carapace and the claws of the model. This will also include the little ventricle areas on the model's skin, and obviously any sort of gaps in between there as well, as they're all a sort of very dark black colour. And for this we're going to use Black Templar, and you may find when sort of going over the carapace particularly that you may want sort of two coats of this, but you sort of leave this up to your discretion depending on how dark you want it to be. Obviously we will be putting some highlights on there, but obviously just depends obviously how dark you want the base coat to be. But do take your time, sort of work your way around the model. Obviously try not to get anything onto the red skin, particularly obviously but that you've already done. If you do make any mistakes, you can neaten up with the sort of Wraithbone and then sort of apply sort of dots of the Blood Angels Red back over the top. This shouldn't distort the overall sort of tone of the model too much. Once you're happy with that black carapace, we can then block in the last of the contrast paint for the base coating, and that is for the teeth area here. If you haven't already done so, it's a good idea to sort of neaten up with Wraithbone, just to clean up the teeth, just in case any of that Blood Angels Red has made its way onto there. But this is sort of neat, straight from the pot, using obviously quite a small brush to keep the accuracy here, and we're just going to sort of coat over that mouth to give some good definition behind the teeth, and also ready for adding a small highlight later. Now obviously a lot of these models do come with sort of open mouths, so you can obviously do the same method with the open mouth, and then if you watch some of my other tutorials I have got some obviously tutorial parts that focus on the teeth and tongue for an open mouth. Once all those base coats are dry, the next thing we're going to be looking to do is highlight up some of that skin. So for this we're going to start off with Evil Sun Scarlet, and this is just to pick out the sort of raised edges on the skin itself, so any sort of parts of the muscle areas, any sort of around any particular details, just to sort of make the recesses stand out a bit further. Sort of take your time to work your way around the model. In some cases, sort of less is more. You don't want to go sort of too overpowering, because otherwise you won't sort of see the areas predominantly that you're focusing on. But obviously work your way around. When you're happy with that, we can then move on to the next highlight. Once you're happy with that first highlight of Evil Sun Scarlet, we can move on to a second, more sort of edge highlight of Fire Dragon Bright. And this is sort of quite a sparing highlight, as it will most certainly show up. And this is just for the sort of sharpest of edges on the model that you really want to stand out. So anything sort of like where the skin breaks or tears, sort of going around the edge, and just using, you want a nice fine point to your brush and sort of work your way around where you want to show off a little bit more. But do take your time, and then we can move on to the next stage. Once you're happy and finished off that red skin, we're going to move on to highlighting the black carapace here. And for that we're going to start off with a layer of Sotek green, and we are going to be doing a sort of feathering technique on the back here. So getting a nice fine point to your brush and sort of drawing small and as precise lines on the armour as possible, just to obviously make it a little bit more a worn effect on there, and to obviously break up that black panelling. So take your time, sort of work your way around all that panelling. So that will include obviously the back part here, the knee joint, and the top head crest as well. And then once you've worked through that, we can move on to the next highlight. Once you've finished with that Sotek green, we're going to finish off that carapace with a final highlight of Temple Guard blue. And in much the same way as using the Sotek green, we're going to sort of feather down the backs of this panel, but instead of going quite so high, we are going to focus on just really the tips of where the armour panelling is. So just sort of down here on the very edges. So do again, work your way around the model, and then we can move on to the next stage. So once you've done that feathering effect, we're going to stick with Temple Guard blue, and in this time we're going to be doing a sort of edge highlight round the carapace itself. So these sort of shoulder pads here, for instance, the crevice down the backs of the spine, just to obviously again break up that black panelling and give it a bit more light and texture, and again moving on to the top head crest as well. Once you're happy with the back carapace, we're going to move on to highlighting the claws and hoofs of the model. And for this we're going to start off with a highlight of Skaven Blight Dinge. And we're going to use this as an edge highlight, so particularly on the claws here, just take the side of the brush and run it on the sharpest points of the claw. And again the same for any of the little ones as well. And then when you come to the hoofs on the back here, so again sort of running the brush down the sort of sharpest edges of the hoof, but also just sort of doing a slight sort of dragging up feathering effect, and just sort of breaking up that black again. Once you've finished that first highlight of Skaven Blight Dinge, we're going to move on to the next highlight for the black, which is Storm Vermin Fur. And this is just for the sort of sharpest points of the model, as this is quite a slightly brighter highlight to do on this sort of dirty black arm, sort of claws and teeth of the model in that respect. So just sort of picking out the very tips of these claws here, and the same underneath as well. And then not forgetting the hoofs at the back of the model. And then to add a few final touches to the model, we're going to use pallid witch flesh, and we're going to use this in a couple of different ways. Firstly, just very carefully to pick out the teeth on the model here, so leaving that sort of skeleton horde recess shade in the back there of the mouth, but this is just going to make those teeth stand out a little further. And then secondly, we are going to, again with a very fine point to the brush, we're going to pop a little bit in each eye socket, very carefully, just running the brush in there. And then with that pallid witch flesh applied to the eye sockets, we're going to get a little bit of iodine yellow to give that standard Tyranid yellow eye glow in there. So just run a little bit of that paint into the eye socket recesses and allow that to dry. And there we have our finished Hormagaunt for Hive Fleet Behemoth. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have any questions or feedback, please leave them in the comments below. I will come back to you. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thanks for watching.